this is our Unit 1 Drawing Environment Artist to Inspire PowerPoint. First, let's review the Unit 1 assignment. For our first extended drawing assignment, we will be describing our classroom environment. Note, the word environment is not synonymous with or limited to a description of space. By definition, the word environment refers to the conditions that surround people and affect the way they live. In these drawings, you will be responding to the space, time, and activity of our classroom, KV 127, and potentially other spaces that you occupy and inhabit over the next 4 weeks. You will be executing these drawings over the next 8 class periods and for homework. During Unit 1, students will be using observational drawing techniques, including sight sizing. For this technique, the artist remains stationary and renders their surrounding at the exact scale and position that they appear to the artist in life. You'll also be working with 2-point and 3-point linear perspective, atmospheric perspective, and potentially exaggerated perspective, as well as practicing techniques for tonal rendering in charcoal. As you work, the changing nature of the place, people, and personal priorities and perspectives will present a challenge. The drawing will change as your experience of your environment does and reveal the history of its development and convey an image of your experience. The first artist whose work we're going to look at is Peter Milton. He's an American drawer and printmaker, born in the 1930s. He's 90 now, and he mostly worked out of Syracuse, New York. What you'll really notice about Peter Milton's work is how he combines distinct drawing styles in the same image to sort of confound the idea of what can be possible and impossible at the same time, and kind of what drawings look like. Immediately off the bat, we see that on the right side of this composition, he's really drawn in a way where he used value and tone to kind of emulate a black and white photograph. He's creating a lot of illusionistic dimension and conveying space through changes in value, revealing distinct shapes. If we look over on the left side of this drawing, we see a style that would connect more with an architectural sort of plan or 3D modeling of an architectural space. Everything is rendered with line, and the architecture feels kind of like a skeleton of its future self. It's kind of interesting to think about or to see a drawing that has both something that uses the style of a blueprint or architectural style sit with something that emulates the way a camera lens sees, because we definitely encounter those kind of imagery in 2 different places. A camera documents the experience of space from the past, right? And a line rendering or an architectural rendering is usually planning for space in the future. So just the sheer way that he's drawing starts to get you to think about time. Additionally, he plays in between those 2 styles with allowing the way he draws to move from a highly controlled descriptive rendering to a kind of mark making that softens and almost looks like it sort of dissolves into dust that could be blown away. And as a drawer, you have control and the tools for all of these styles at your fingertips, literally. So you can absolutely be playing and shifting, in the same with drawing with how you represent the world, which gets to be really quite exciting. Here's another Peter Milton. This one is an etching. So we get everything looking a little bit more crisp and clear, but the same kind of play and shifting of styles. He's really clearly using linear perspective this time to help guide the eye to different directions and convey an illusion of space, but at the same time, you can really start seeing that these spaces are almost composited on one another. We have certain shapes kind of rise up, and we have these two kind of simultaneous ground planes. We play with highly rendered again to something much more linear. He's also deliberately shifting focus here from something hyper focused, you know, kind of past that 20/20 vision point where everything's so sharp it's almost uncomfortable, to something really overtly blurry, sitting again next to something that's strictly linear. So again, he draws in this very convincing way, but the way he organizes those descriptions together start making you wonder as a viewer and think about whether you're actually seeing a possible or impossible space, which gets to be really kind of neat to explore. You know, sometimes he does make spaces that feel much more connected all the way across the picture plane, but he plays with sort of the actual and the imaginary. And another clue that he's often using is implied transparency. These subjects that are rendered and can be seen, but can simultaneously be seen through by layering a play of tonal rendering and value work. Which could be another really kind of interesting way to convey or suggest a sense of time, even in a drawing that's very still. You can see that the sort of figures that pull into view or dissolve away from view make you start thinking about how present they actually are, whether they might be a ghost or a memory or a dream. And it's that shift in drawing approach that start triggering those questions in the viewer's mind, and keep us interested in really exploring that picture plane, not necessarily just taking it all in as truth and immediately at face value. It starts telling more of a story. All right. A lot of the same sort of techniques that we've seen in other Peter Milton works. Here he's really layering very different kinds of landscape. And I think another thing that we see here is his play of sort of where things start and stop. I love the way that this tree dissolves at the bottom of it. We have this kind of strange play of scale, looking at just how small and tiny these children are compared to the paver bricks, which are fairly familiar, or the size of like a stair step that we're seeing. Gets to be really quite interesting. We move pretty seamless from kind of architecture to dense foliage, to sort of a transparent suggestion of a rooftop there. And again, you know, initially it just looks like this highly rendered, very convincing space, but its logic sort of falls apart or reinvents itself to a new kind of, it asks you to believe in kind of a different kind of space, because drawings just don't have to follow all of the rules that the real world does. But we can use those rules to convince you that they could. Larry Rivers is the next artist that we're looking at. He is an American drawer, painter, and jazz musician, or he was. Lived from 1923 through 2002, mostly worked out of California. But he really likes to use simultaneity as a clue, that the drawing isn't, or the work isn't happening in just one moment. This is a watercolor drawing painting. And what's interesting here is we see the same subject, this woman, but we see her in two different moments in the same image. She's sitting on the bed, and then she's standing beside it. We can also notice, we can follow the pattern of the bedspread across the entire picture plane, but you can also start seeing that bed sort of warps and it gets elongated. So what we're seeing is we actually see the drawer working from two different positions. First, you drew the model over here as she was sitting on the bed, and then he moved to the other side of the room and drew her standing in front of the bed. And in the meantime, we get this elongation of that bed shape and two different directions of light falling on her body, which is another way to suggest a shift in time of day. So again, we see simultaneous subject matters that we can recognize as the same person, but we know it must be done at different times because we're seeing them in two different places. And then also here we're seeing different directions of light source. This light source looks like the sun from a window. It's kind of that soft, broad, sort of raking light that you get from more so from a window than from like a lamp. And so that makes us think, oh, you know, maybe this one was drawn in morning light, and now we're seeing her as the sun is sort of coming down at a new angle later in the day. So that's another kind of way to create clues about time in an image. And then, of course, as a final thing, that strong elongation of that bed because he's seen the bed from two different angles at the same time. This one might get even a little bit wilder. We can see, again, repetition of our same characters. This model moves from kind of leaning over the chair to sort of sprawling out along the chair to sitting at the floor. We see this woman in the pattern dress from two different positions as the artist moved from different perspectives to view her work. We also see kind of a sequence of movements in this character where he was sitting up, posing for the artist, and then got sort of tired and tilted his head over. This strong character, who I think kind of makes a little too strong of a compositional break, but you know. Anyway, we can see a suggestion of her arms in multiple positions, reaching up and reaching down, also suggesting movement. There's also a really interesting kind of thing about how the images sort of happen and kind of fits and starts. He's not overly concerned about connecting all of the shapes. So it makes you think about just how he's looking at things as if it has a bit of a faster pace to it, right? It's not a clearly long, sustained kind of observation. It sort of makes you think that the artist is interested in a lot of things in this space. And he just, as he notices them, he gets them down and then he moves on, but maybe he'll return, which I think is very in line with how a lot of us experience the world and you know, maybe what our brain is doing as we start conceiving of what we want to draw. And so I love, there's something that just feels like the artist is so interested as I look at this drawing, and so curious about many different parts of the world that's he's able to observe and describe. And so again, kind of paints another sort of story and casts its own energy because of the way it's rendered. I should also mention this piece is huge. So it is, I think it's 16 feet wide by 18 feet tall. So that's essentially the whole length of our crit wall in the drawing studio. So imagine he's doing this also while kind of climbing up and climbing down a ladder to be able to capture the image and cover this picture plane, which I think adds another layer of kind of how it makes you think about how we see and how we work on rendering or constructing a space. Okay, again, This is also Larry Rivers. We see a lot of the same strategies that we've seen in previous works that I've showed you, some simultaneity, some kind of starting and stopping. In this watercolor, though, I think he uses the fluidity of the media in a way to suggest the temporal or the sort of fleeting nature of observing and rendering the world around us that is actually moving. Nothing feels too stable or too stuck. He uses that sort of flowiness or blendiness as a way to suggest a sense of movement too. And I think that could be another, you could play with different strategies for gesture and kind of suggestion, as opposed to a really resolved rendering, to help in your image suggest a shift in time or space or even your emotion, you know, how you sort of secure your feel in that process, and or how much you like rendering it or don't like rendering it. Kind of playing with how your mark can shift to suggest a different energy is another thing I highly encourage you to do in this work. Jeanette Barnes is a contemporary English drawer. She works out of London primarily, and you'll see that really quickly here. So she has a really interesting process. It's definitely based in a sketch practice. So what she'll do is she'll go in a very disciplined way, kind of every week or every day for a number of weeks. She'll visit the same spot and just record it, what she sees in that spot, in her sketchbook. Then what she does is she brings these quick little renderings back, and she redraws what she's drawn in her sketchbook at a larger scale and on a drawing that she works day after day for a month. So this is Trafalgar Square in London. It's kind of like Times Square in New York. And so you can see, so it's busy, just really busy, bustling, happening. And you can definitely see that she's capturing these quickly moving people kind of as gestures, and it's clear. You can see it sort of drawn and erased and drawn and erased again, you know, as she encounters different subjects in each day. Then we start looking up though, and we see the architecture, and that gets to be a bit more stable. You know, she's working for a discrete time out in space, but there are going to be these buildings that are the same. They're hundreds and hundreds of years old. And so, you know, she can just get a little bit more of those stable architecture each day. You know, she can come and the space can answer new questions for her, and then she brings those back to her studio and is able to define the architecture further. So you get this sense of the most stable parts of the space and the most ephemeral parts of the space in the same drawing. There's this kind of flurry of activity in the living kind of human moments of the drawing, and then as the drawing progresses, the architecture gets more and more stable, secure, strong, and finished looking. This is kind of an interesting one. She documented the process of the building of the one of the Olympic stadiums in London. And so, you know, each day she'd go and the crane would be in a different spot. And so she'd bring her sketches back and add the new position of the crane. And also you see the architecture rising up and building in that building itself too. And so you see that building kind of grow into the sky. You see the booms of the cranes feeling like they're moving rather wildly, even though, you know, those things typically don't move terribly fast. You might just encounter it in one position the whole time. But because this was made over a number of days, just like we're going to be working, you get this conversation about time and movement and changing things. And we start getting to sort of think about this repeated object of the crane as a moving object that changes and works and builds. All right, I just threw this one in there because it also her work, slightly different charcoal approach. It's a little bit more blended stroke. I wanted to particularly show you how she is using a different kind of mark making to suggest light versus form. She uses a softer, more sort of blended mark to play with the play of light and shadow on that ceiling plane in particular. All right, now what I'm going to do is just show you a few student works to also inspire you. The neatest thing about this unit, I've taught it for many semesters now, and I love teaching it first because it really is a nice, there's so many opportunities for you to make it your own, for the drawing to ultimately really share your own interests and priorities as an artist, and for you to be able to push it in lots of unexpected directions. And I so enjoy learning about who you are as a drawing as a function of kind of where you decide to take this work day in and day out. So so these are just some initial ideas. I look forward to the many different directions you all will take it to, but here we go. So this is by artist Danielle Sarver. She became really interested in kind of working with the stable versus the ephemeral. She was working by her good friend Anna in the classroom, but they had different time schedules. So we can see Anna's drawing board. Sometimes she's kind of rendering the space in front of her, but we also sometimes see that space kind of moves past and through Anna in a transparent way for when that space really got to kind of empty out versus be more full with other artists working in there. I think Danny also did a really nice job of kind of emphasizing lights that were sometimes on and sometimes off. We have this really interesting play of light and shadow on the floor, and then also just intense concentrations of detail to help direct the viewer's path of vision. Josh had a similar approach in his semester. I was pushing this still life in and out of the way. It was a still life I used for another class, but it was almost always in a different position. And, you know, that became a kind of complicated shape, but instead of being sort of distressed that it was always in a different place every time he came in, he just started selecting sort of moments of interest that he would see as it moved into each perspective and layering them in a way that became compositionally interesting. And so, you know, stylistically, he kept his work really strongly connected. So at first you sort of believe that you're seeing everything all at once. And it's not until you start exploring the complexity of the space that you start seeing that certain things are repeating themselves. Some are floating in space, some are playing with that starting and stopping. He also got really interested in kind of how structural lines could help build an interesting path of vision. He found that a lot of the activity was happening over on the right side of the composition. So he pushed a chair into this lower left corner. You can definitely intervene on the experience to make it your own, but he just needed something to sort of ground the composition down there. So he made that happen with that little chair at the base. This is Cecilia Winters, and she was really interested in a couple of things. She wanted to create these stable spaces, but combine many different kind of places and subjects into that same composition. So here we see her studio space in the painting studio. And for those of you who know this building, you know that doesn't turn a corner and move into the stairwell, but she sort of matched some perspective to make it feel as though that could happen. So this one these disparate spaces start looking connected. Coming off of this edge, she made it into a street edge where then we are outside in the parking lot at IUS. Again, that doesn't happen right after the stair of non-view, but we sort of believe it. She also described her fellow student, Manuel, in two different positions. And we kind of get the sense, we get familiar with his hair, his kind of posture, his activity, painting. So that starts building a narrative. We recognize that same character in two different positions, which starts giving us thinking about narrative, story, sequence, and builds into more of a conversation of time and space too. Also color. I won't say no to color. We're starting in charcoal. It's a really flexible and kind of fast material that allows you to sort of put things down and take them off really quickly, especially when you're just trying to figure out how you want to organize your picture plan and layer different times and experiences. But once you get sort of a handle on that, I will absolutely encourage you to start bringing new materials in there that will extend your composition and your approach to this and make this image more yours. Some students like Emily Gibson are less interested in the space coming together into something that's obviously architectural. All of these sort of edges, corners, colors, shapes are things that she found and observed, but she really took liberties in sort of pulling them from an observed space and moving them into a design space that she could really control the character and the sort of organization of the composition. It isn't something you'll necessarily feel like you have sort of handle on how to do on the first day of this drawing, but that's one of the reasons we do it over many days. You will lay something down and or lots of things down, but at a certain point we sort of shift our direction to then being sort of editors of our composition, and you may choose to take some things away, reposition, reorient. I think she did a lot of turning her canvas or her drawing board as she went, so she was being able to present things at different directions and different angles as she worked. Landy did a kind of a similar thing. She invited things even beyond the classroom, which I think, especially since you'll be doing these half at home, will probably happen a lot this semester. But she was taking this class simultaneously to a very challenging math class. And so she was sort of playing with both of those things. At different points, when I've taught this, we've had models come in. When I had taught this later in the semester, so Allison was, you sort of see that experience as a layer of activity in this drawing as well. Some of them are more open. You know, you can see a lot of kind of shadows of objects that were there, but these really sort of focused points. So these might become very dense drawings, but it could also be more about these kind of pointed areas of interest. And I think that's it for now. So you'll go ahead and get started.